his thought and organization to, and I think that that will be important to, as one of the steps forward towards implementation of that agreement.
Good. We have another question?
This is completely a different topic. I walked around. Sorry, Linda Kellen, the Mud Flats, and I went to the fair on Saturday and walked around to the various growers' booths and asked them what climate change questions would you be interested in hearing about from, if you could ever go to the Glacier conference, and they did a study at UAF several years ago. That said that the Fairbanks growing season has increased by 1 month, and that was a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's probably increased by even more at this point. We have a terrible food insecurity problem, how would the Arctic Steering Committee be able to maybe do some positive uses or adaptability uses where we can more develop the farming community, develop our own local food growth, through uses of high tunnels, anything else, because they're growing food up as far north as Bethel, and very, very successfully.
Sure. I mean, let me first of all say it is absolutely true that climate change has some benefits for some places, and a longer growing season up this way and even farther north is obviously one of those. Mm-hmm. At the same time, one of the downsides is we're also having a longer wildfire season. Mm-hmm. And the size, extent, and the hotness of wildfires in Alaska are all up very substantially over the last few decades and expected to continue to go up. So while we will get some benefit from a longer growing season, we have a very substantial downside that has to be managed. And the second part of your question, I think, relates to how we can work with folks in the farming community and in other communities to help them take advantage of those aspects of climate change that could be beneficial while building preparedness, resilience, and adaptation against those aspects of climate change that are not beneficial. Just in the agricultural space, a further potential problem, and in fact in some parts of the country it's already a very real problem, is that longer growing seasons are also longer breeding seasons for pests. Right. And you get changes in the geographic distribution of pests or in the size of their populations that can also be problematic. And again, we need to think about preparedness, adaptation, and resilience against those kinds of changes.
And if I could add to what Dr. Holdren said on the resilience piece, the Arctic Executive Steering Committee is dedicated to advancing a resilience strategy. And what does that mean, ma'am, in terms of subsistence living populations in Alaska's Arctic? Well, take, for example, the refrigeration cellars, where whale meat, for example, is stored, or other natural foods are stored. Those are able to refrigerate much less. What does that mean, and how can we work with the USDA to help solve that problem? One, take, for example, subsistence hunting, and some of the problems that you've seen in the changes in diet of some of the game around Alaska's Arctic that has impacted those who have eaten that game. And there are local stories pertinent to that. Understanding what is happening and developing a strategy to help people is what we're dedicated to.
And by the way, that does call for a further addition. The understanding what is happening, one of the things that we're advancing both in the Arctic Executive Steering Committee domestically, and Secretary Kerry and Admiral Papp are pushing in the Arctic Council, is cooperation on better, more comprehensive, more continuous monitoring and measurement of what is happening. And that's monitoring and measurement not only of how the climate is changing, but the impacts it's having and the responses that societies are undertaking. We need to understand all of that, and we need to understand it pretty much in real time in order to be as effective as we ought to be in the domain of preparedness, adaptation, and resilience.
Thank you both.
Sure. So my name is Lehiona. I'm a researcher at Dartmouth, but I'm here reporting for the Interpress Service in RTCC, and I'm curious if you could both talk a little bit more about young people. I know a lot of lip service has been paid to young people so far today without any real tangible commitments or ways to engage young people and the issues that directly affect them. For example, mental health in the Arctic is a really big problem, besides from the fact that they're a future generation. So I was wondering if there is any plan to engage meaningfully and tangibly young people in this committee.
Well, let me start, and then I'm going to turn it pretty quickly over to Ambassador Brzezinski, who I know is up on some of the most recent initiatives, including some that I think were just announced yesterday.
That's right.
We've had a very strong focus in this administration all along, not only on science, technology, engineering, and math education, starting from the youngest grades, but on a better job of inclusion in STEM opportunities, in providing young people with the ingredients of success in STEM fields that brings in more women, because women, young women and girls are underrepresented in STEM fields, that brings in more African Americans, more Hispanics, and more Native Americans. And those programs include major initiatives that have real resources behind them, and in many cases, public-private partnerships in which the private sector has stepped up to support these efforts to provide mentors and role models out in communities of particular need, communities that have been underrepresented and underserved in these domains. We've had a whole variety of White House brainstorming events, bringing in the people who have launched successful initiatives in this space. Our team spent some time yesterday with the ANCEP group at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, which is one of the real success stories in helping young members of the indigenous community here in Alaska access the opportunities, the excitement, and ultimately the productive employment available in the STEM fields. But I'm going to let Mark say a little more about the most recent initiatives.
Thank you, Dr. Holdren. You say you're from Dartmouth, and that I think is a great place to start, because at Dartmouth you have a Arctic Studies Institute and a Native American Studies program that is dedicated to propagating understanding and network building in these spaces, and also one of the two co-lead scholars of the brand new State Department Fulbright Arctic Initiative is Dartmouth professor Ross Virginia, and that is a program that is meant to bring youth together from the 8 Arctic Council countries. And Dr. Holdren was able to sit down with some of those Fulbright Arctic Initiative scholars to hear about the diversity of research across the hard sciences, political science, social sciences, studying mental health and the Arctic and challenges and so forth. And so that is a program that is underway from your home base, so to speak. But if you take a look at the announcements made by the White House yesterday, several are focused on youth and in a diverse, targeted way. For example, the Department of Interior unrolled a youth program dedicated to promoting an Arctic way of life. In other words, promoting stewardship, making sure that traditional knowledge is retained and, quite frankly, shared by them for the benefit of us. The Art Place America announced yesterday in a program crystallized by the administration, a $3 million effort in Anchorage alone to use arts and culture to revitalize neighborhoods in this incredibly diverse city of Anchorage. And there's a strong youth component to that art initiative. As well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the ANCEP program that Dr. Holdren mentioned, and the Rasmussen program together were part of an announcement by the White House yesterday of an over $1 million program to connect native stewardship, the natural sciences, and wildlife management together. So those are just 3 announcements pertinent to youth that were part of the White House engagement yesterday. But I think that there's a more important response to your answer, which is that youth are going to be an essential part of this conversation, because the communications landscape is changing so fast and youth are so much part of that. And to get the bearing witness of what is happening in the Arctic and the societies that live here, and with the people who are participating in those changes here, is an essential, quite frankly, imperative of the youth that are involved. And so I think that's part of the answer too.
The other thing that this whole set of activities around the Glacier Conference and the President's visit is all about is lifting up the whole notion of the importance of Alaska to the United States, the importance of the Arctic to the world, and clearly young people have to be a major part of that. And you'll hear, I think, more of that from the President as he talks about these issues while he's here. It's really an extraordinary thing, certainly in my experience, that the President of the United States would spend 3 days in one state and traveling around and focusing, among other things, on these issues of youth, of the challenges and the opportunities facing the indigenous communities in the Arctic and around Alaska.
First, thanks for coming. It's a big state. It takes 3 days. So
it would take more than that to really do it. I mean.
Okay, so on the question, we've heard a lot about oil spill and oil spill response, but when you actually look at the spill response plan for the Northwest Arctic, Bering Strait region, especially where the shipping and shells activities are, it goes village by village, and there's essentially nothing in each village. It'll say spill response capacity none is what the actual. So I wonder, on a federal level, is there any commitment to really meet more resources that then the state could use for these local villages? Because we've also heard a lot about how important the villages are as first responders. They truly will be first responders, and there is essentially no equipment on the ground in most of these villages.
That is one of the things that the task force of the Arctic Executive Steering Committee on Oil Spill Response is looking at. In fact, they have already prepared a preliminary report. There will be probably a series of reports from that group on what more needs to be done. I think you can expect that there will be not just further analysis, but there will be resources forthcoming for those tasks.
Russia used to be at the forefront of Arctic science. Could you characterize our relationship with them in terms of cooperation in science?
Well, first of all, we do continue to cooperate with Russia in really 3 domains in the scientific space. We continue to cooperate with Russia in the Arctic. We continue to cooperate with Russia in space, and we continue to cooperate on a variety of fundamental research projects, areas in which, notwithstanding the tensions that exist at this time, which everybody's well aware of, it is nonetheless so clearly in the mutual interest of the United States and Russia to continue to collaborate in these areas that we continue to do it. And I have spoken with some of my Russian counterparts about this. They remain completely committed to cooperating in this domain. Ambassador Kislyak, representing Russia in today's proceedings, spoke explicitly about Russia's commitment to continue to cooperate on science around the Arctic region. I've also spoken privately with Ambassador Kislyak about this. There's no question about the genuineness of the determination on both sides to continue to collaborate in these domains.
And if I could just add to what Dr. Holdren said, it makes eminent sense to do that given just the entire size of the coastline that Russia has in the Arctic. And I think it's important to note that while we have very real concerns in terms of our relationship with Russia right now in North Central Europe, Russia was part of the declaration in July on calling for a moratorium on commercial fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean. And that declaration will, there's going to be an effort to expand that to more countries. But one of the original 5 of that declaration is Russia. So our work with them continues on the Arctic, and it should. Russia takes part in the Arctic Fulbright program, just to give you a more focused, dedicated scientific effort, but they're absolutely part of that as well.